I gave her everything. $450,000. Every dollar I saved for 30 years. She said it was for our future, our resort, our retirement together. I believed her. God help me, I believed every word. Then one morning, I woke up and she was gone. The money, the dream, her, all of it just gone. I'm sitting across from Sheila at this beachside cafe in Mactan, and she's laughing at something I said. I can't even remember what it was now, but at that moment, her laugh was the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. The sun was hitting her face just right, and I thought to myself, this is it. This is what being alive feels like. I'd forgotten. 4 years of silence in that empty house in New Hampshire, and I'd genuinely forgotten what it felt like to matter to someone. You're funny, Leland, she said, touching my hand across the table. Her fingers were warm. I like talking with you. You're different from other foreigners here. I asked her what she meant. Most men, they come here and they just want, she said, looking down at her iced coffee. They don't ask questions. They don't listen. But you actually care what I think. I did care. God, I cared so much it scared me. My wife Margaret died of cancer 4 years before this moment. Lung cancer. Never smoked a day in her life. Our kids, they tried to be there, but they had their own lives in California and Texas. After the funeral, they called less and less. I understood. I didn't blame them. But the house got so quiet. I'd wake up at 3 in the morning and just lie there, listening to nothing. My buddy from work suggested the Philippines. Cheap, beautiful, warm people, he said. Go for 2 weeks. Clear your head. I came for 2 weeks. I met Sheila on my 3rd day. I walked into this language center in Cebu City because I thought maybe I'd take a Tagalog class, keep myself busy. She was teaching a group of Korean students, and I just stood there in the doorway watching her. She was patient with them, kind, correcting their pronunciation with this gentle smile. When the class ended, she saw me standing there. "Can I help you?" she asked. I felt like an idiot. I was thinking about taking lessons, I said. Tagalog, I mean. She smiled. Your first time in the Philippines? We ended up talking for an hour. She told me about her students, about how she loved teaching but dreamed of doing something more. I told her about New Hampshire, about the insurance job I'd just retired from, about how strange it felt to suddenly have all this time and nothing to fill it with. That sounds lonely, she said quietly. Nobody had said that to me before. Everyone back home kept saying how lucky I was, how I could finally relax, travel, enjoy life. But Sheila looked at me and saw what it really was, loneliness. Would you like to get coffee sometime? I asked, and I was terrified she'd say no. She didn't say no. I'd like that, she said. I'd like that very much. Our first real date was at this place near the water. She wore a simple yellow dress and her hair was down, and I remember thinking she was the most beautiful woman I'd ever seen. We talked for hours. She told me about her father who died when she was 12, how she'd had to help her mother raise her younger brother. It was hard, she said, but it made me strong, you know. I asked her about her dreams. That's when she first mentioned it. Someday I want to have a small resort, she said, her eyes lighting up. Nothing fancy. Just 10 rooms, maybe. Right on the beach, somewhere peaceful where people can come and forget their problems for a while. I asked her why she hadn't done it yet. She laughed, but it was sad. Leland, do you know how much teachers make here? I send most of my salary to my mother. There's nothing left for dreams. I wanted to tell her right then that I could help, but something stopped me. Instead, I just said, "You'd be amazing at that. You have this way of making people feel comfortable." She reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Thank you," she whispered. Nobody's ever said that to me before. When I tried to pay for dinner, she insisted on splitting it. "I'm not that kind of girl," she said firmly. "I pay my own way." That made me respect her even more. She wasn't like what I'd heard about, what other guys warned me about. She was different. She was real. The next 2 months were the happiest I'd had in years. We saw each other almost every day. Morning walks along the beach before her classes started. She'd hold my hand and tell me about her students, about the funny mistakes they made, about her coworker who was dating 3 guys at once and didn't know how to choose. I told her about my life back home, about Margaret, about how guilty I felt for being happy again. "Your wife would want you to be happy," Sheila said one morning as we watched the sunrise. "Love doesn't mean stopping your heart when someone dies. It means opening it again when you're ready." I looked at her. "You think I'm ready?" She kissed my cheek. "I think you've been ready for a long time, Leland. You were just waiting for someone to notice." I extended my stay. Then I extended it again. My buddy Gary called from New Hampshire. "When are you coming back?" he asked. "Soon," I said. But I didn't mean it. I didn't want to go back to that empty house. I didn't want to leave her. 3 months in, and we were cooking together at her small apartment. Nothing fancy, just adobo and rice. But she taught me how to do it right, laughing when I added too much soy sauce. Okay, American style," she teased. We ate on her tiny balcony, and she told me more about her family. Her mother had remarried and moved to Mindanao. Her brother Miguel was living with cousins in Manila, trying to find work. "He's a good boy," she said. "Just unlucky. Can't seem to catch a break." I asked if she helped support him. "When I can," she said quietly. "He's my baby brother. I can't just leave him struggling." That night, after maybe too many San Miguel beers, we were lying in bed, and she brought it up again, the resort. "Sometimes I dream about it so clearly," she said. "I can see exactly how it would look. The little cottages, the restaurant overlooking the water, the garden with all the flowers. I even have a name for it. Paradise Found." I turned to her. "That's beautiful." She laughed softly. "It's just a dream, Leland. Dreams don't come true for people like me." I don't know if it was the beer or the way she looked so sad when she said that, but I told her, "What if we could do it together?" She went quiet. "What do you mean?" "I mean I have savings," I said. "Margaret and we lived simple. I've got the insurance payout, my retirement account. What if we invested it in something real? Something ours?" She sat up, looking at me with these wide eyes. "Leland, I couldn't ask you to do that." "You're not asking," I said. "I'm offering." She was quiet for a long time. Then she kissed me, soft and slow. "You're too good to me," she whispered. "You're too good to be real." The next few weeks, I started researching properties online. Land values, construction costs, business permits. It all seemed doable. Sheila and I would lie in bed looking at listings on my laptop. She'd say, pointing at a beachfront plot, "But probably too expensive." I'd check the price. 80,000, 120. Numbers that would have scared me back home. But here, with her beside me, they seemed possible, manageable. She started opening up more about money. Little things at first. "I'm sorry. I can't go to that restaurant tonight. I had to send extra to Miguel this week." Or, "I need to skip our trip to Bohol. My mom needs help with her medication." I started paying for everything. Dinners, groceries, her taxi rides. She'd protest at first, but less and less. "You don't have to do this," she'd say. "I want to," I'd tell her. And I did. I wanted to take care of her. It made me feel useful again. Needed. Like I had a purpose. I didn't notice that she'd stopped refusing. I didn't notice that her protests got quieter each time. I just kept giving. Because giving made me feel like I mattered. Then Miguel showed up. Sheila called me one afternoon, sounding nervous. "Leland, my brother's in town. He wants to meet you. Is that okay?" Of course it was okay. I wanted to meet her family. I wanted to be part of her life. We met at a mall in Cebu City. Miguel was thin, probably 28 or so, with this big smile and a firm handshake. "Sir Leland," he said, "thank you for taking care of my aunt. She talks about you all the time. We had lunch together. He was charming, easy to talk to, full of stories about Manila and his plans to start a business. Just need a little capital," he said, "but I'll get there." Sheila was quieter than usual. After Miguel left, I asked her if everything was okay. "He's struggling," she said. "He lost his job 3 months ago. The company went bankrupt. He's been doing odd jobs, but it's not enough." I asked if he needed help. She looked at me. "I can't ask you to do that." "You're not asking," I said, echoing what I'd told her before. "How much does he need?" It started small, $200 for a job interview in Manila, then $500 because he'd borrowed from a friend and needed to pay it back, then $800 because he'd gotten scammed by a loan shark and they were threatening him. Each time, Sheila would come to me looking ashamed, almost in tears. "I hate asking you this," she'd say. "I know it's not fair." I'd hold her. "Family helps family." I'd tell her, "We're in this together, right?" She'd nod against my chest. "I don't deserve you." But something started changing. She stopped talking about the resort. When I'd bring it up, she'd change the subject or say, "Not yet. Let's make sure Miguel's stable first." I told myself it made sense. Family came first. But a knot was forming in my stomach, tight and cold. I'd lie awake at night, listening to her breathe beside me, and that knot would twist tighter. One night I couldn't help myself. "Sheila," I said into the dark. "Yeah? How much have I given Miguel?" Silence. Then, "I don't know. Maybe 3,000 total?" I'd done the math in my head. It was closer to 6. I didn't say anything. I just turned over and closed my eyes, and that knot pulled tighter still. 6 months after I met her, Sheila came home one evening practically glowing. "Leland, I have amazing news," she said, dropping her bag and coming to hug me. "I found it. I found our property." My heart jumped. Finally. "Where?" "Bantayan Island," she said. "My Tita Lou's my aunt. She knows the owner. He's selling because he's moving to Dubai. It's perfect, Leland. Right on the beach, already cleared, ready to build." She showed me photos on her phone. White sand, crystal water, palm trees. It looked like paradise. "How much?" I asked. She bit her lip. "It's expensive, but it's worth it. 180,000 for the land, then another 120 for construction. 300,000 total." My stomach dropped. That was almost everything I had saved. "That's a lot," I said carefully. "I know," she said quickly. "But, Leland, this is it. This is our dream. And land values here are only going up. In 5 years, it'll be worth double." I asked if I could see it first. She nodded. "Of course. Tita Luz wants to meet you first anyway. She's protective of me." We met Tita Luz at her house in Cebu. She was a small woman, maybe 58, with sharp eyes and a careful smile. She served us coffee and pandesal, and we talked about everything except the property at first. Where I was from, what I did for work, how I met Sheila. "My niece is a good girl," Tita Luz said, watching me closely. "She's had a hard life. She deserves someone who will treat her right." "I care about her very much," I said. "I can see that," she said. "Money doesn't buy happiness, but it helps, doesn't it?" It felt like a test, like she was measuring me. Sheila squeezed my hand under the table. Finally, Tita Luz showed us the documents, satellite images of the land, a rough survey, contact information for the owner. "He's motivated to sell," she said. "But there are other buyers interested. If you want it, you need to move quickly." I wanted to say yes. God, I wanted to make her happy, but something in me hesitated. "Can we think about it?" I asked. Tita Luz nodded slowly. Of course, but don't wait too long. That night I called Gary. It was early morning in New Hampshire. Leland, he said, his voice thick with sleep. You okay? I need advice, I said. I told him everything. The property, the money, Sheila, all of it. When I finished, there was a long silence. Leland, don't be a damn fool. What? You barely know this woman. 6 months? And you're going to give her $300,000? It's not giving her the money, I said, getting defensive. It's an investment. We're building something together. Leland, listen to yourself. You can't own property there as a foreigner. It'll be in her name. You'll have no legal claim. She wouldn't do that to me. How do you know? Because I know her, Gary. She's not like that. You knew Margaret for 40 years. You've known this girl for 6 months. Come home, please, before you do something you can't undo. I was angry now. You don't understand. I understand that you're lonely and you're scared and you're letting that cloud your judgment. I have to go, I said. Leland, wait. I hung up. Sheila was waiting in the bedroom. Everything okay? She asked. Fine, I said. She came over and wrapped her arms around me. I know this is scary, she said softly. It's scary for me too. But good things are scary sometimes, right? Taking risks, building something real, that's what life is. I held her tight. You promise this is real? I promise, she whispered. I would never hurt you, Leland. Never. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Gary's words, about Margaret, about the last time I'd felt this alive, this needed. By 3 a.m, I'd made my decision. I opened my laptop and logged into my bank. $180,000. I typed in Sheila's account number. My finger hovered over the confirm button. What have you done? A voice whispered in my head. I pushed it away. I hit confirm. The transfer went through. I closed the laptop and went to the bedroom. Sheila was asleep. I lay down beside her, and she instinctively curled into me. I love you, I whispered. She didn't wake up, but in her sleep, she smiled. The next morning, Sheila checked her phone and gasped. Leland, she said, tears in her eyes. You did it. You really did it. I told you I would. She kissed me hard, crying and laughing at the same time. Thank you. Thank you so much. I can't believe this is real. We spent the morning planning. She called Tita Luz, called the seller, started talking about architects and builders. She was so happy, radiant, and I felt like a king, like I'd done something that mattered. That night, we made love, and afterward, she traced her fingers over my chest. You're my hero, she said quietly. You know that? I wanted to believe her. I really did. But somewhere, deep inside, that knot pulled tighter still. 2 months passed. I kept asking about the property. When can we visit the land? I'd ask. Soon, Sheila would say. The paperwork is slow. You know how it is here, Philippine bureaucracy. Not really. She was different now. Distant. She spent more time on her phone, texting people, taking calls in the other room. When I'd try to hold her, she'd say she was tired. When I'd suggest we go out, she'd say she had work to catch up on. Is everything okay? I asked one night. She looked up from her phone, irritated. Fine. Why? You just seem stressed. I am stressed, Leland. I'm trying to manage this whole property thing and work, and Miguel's still struggling, and I just need some space to think. Okay? I backed off. Okay. Sorry. Then Miguel needed more money. $3,000 this time. Medical emergency, Sheila said, not quite meeting my eyes. He was in an accident. Motorcycle. He needs surgery. Is he okay? I asked. He'll be fine, but he doesn't have insurance. I'm sorry. I know this is a lot to ask. I sent the money. I didn't even hesitate. But afterward, I sat at my laptop and looked at my bank account. I'd given her over $200,000 in 6 months. The number stared back at me like an accusation. I started checking my account every day, then multiple times a day, watching the numbers drop. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. One night, Sheila came home late, and I was waiting in the dark. "Where were you?" I asked. She jumped. "Jesus, Leland, you scared me. I was at my friend's house." "Which friend? Does it matter?" "It matters to me." She sighed, turning on the light. "Her name is Carmen. We had dinner. Why are you being like this?" "Like what?" "Paranoid. Controlling." "I'm not being paranoid," I said, but my voice was shaking. "I just want to know what's going on. With the property. With us." She sat down, and for a moment I thought she might tell me the truth. Instead, she started crying. "You think I'm using you," she said. "That's what this is about, isn't it?" "No, after everything we've shared, after everything I've given you. You think I'm some kind of scammer." "Sheila, I don't think that." "Then why are you questioning me?" She was sobbing now. "Do you know how hard this is for me? Trying to build something real with you while everyone around me is telling me you'll just leave? That foreign men always leave?" I went to her, guilt crushing my chest. "I'm not going to leave." "Then trust me," she said, looking up at me with those red eyes. "Please, Leland, just trust me." I held her while she cried. "I trust you," I said. I was lying, to her and to myself. A month later, Sheila came to me with documents. Thick stacks of paper, official-looking, covered in stamps and signatures. "Leland, the construction company needs payment," she said, "to start building." "How much?" $150,000. The room spun. "That's everything I have left." "I know," she said quietly. "But this is it. This is the last big payment. After this, we're done. The resort will be ours." She spread the documents across the table. Contracts with a construction company I'd never heard of. Invoices for materials. Blueprints that looked professional and real. "These look legitimate?" I asked. "I had Tita Luz's lawyer friend look at them," she said. "Everything's in order." I stared at the papers. My hands were shaking. "Leland," Sheila said, taking my face in her hands. "I know you're scared. I'm scared too. But we're so close. Don't give up on our dream now." "What dream?" I wanted to ask. But instead, I just nodded. That afternoon, I made the transfer. $150,000. My retirement account was nearly empty. That night, Sheila was affectionate again, for the first time in weeks. She cooked my favorite meal. She held my hand across the table. She talked about our future. "We'll have a little house on the property," she said. "Just for us. We'll wake up to the ocean every morning. We'll grow old there together, watching the sunsets." I wanted to feel happy, relieved. Instead, I felt hollow, like I'd crossed some invisible line I could never uncross. After dinner, I called Gary. I told him what I'd done. He didn't say anything for a long time. "Leland," he finally said, his voice breaking, "you need to come home." "I can't. Not yet. Not until I see this through." "There's nothing to see through." "Can't you see that?" "She loves me, Gary." "No, she doesn't. And I think you know that. I have to go. Leland, please. I'm begging you. Come home. I love you, buddy. I'll call you soon." I hung up. I sat in the dark living room. Sheila was in the bedroom, asleep or pretending to be. I realized something then, something that made my blood run cold. I didn't know her at all. 6 months, $230,000. And I didn't know a single true thing about her. 2 weeks later, I made a decision. I hired a lawyer. His name was Attorney Romualdo, and his office was in downtown Cebu. Small, cluttered, but he came recommended. "I need you to investigate a property," I said. sliding him the address. He looked at it, then at me. "What are you looking for?" "I need to know if it's real," I said. "If the sale is legitimate. If the construction company exists." He nodded slowly. "This will take time, maybe 2 weeks, and I'll need an advance." I paid him. Another $1,000 I didn't really have. "I'll call you when I have something," he said. Those 2 weeks were the longest of my life. I barely spoke to Sheila. When she'd ask if something was wrong, I'd say I was tired. She didn't push it. She was on her phone constantly now, taking calls on the balcony where I couldn't hear. One night, I woke up at 2 in the morning and she wasn't in bed. I found her in the bathroom, whispering into her phone in Tagalog. She saw me and hung up quickly. "Who was that?" I asked. "My mom. She can't sleep. You know how old people are." I went back to bed. I knew she was lying. Attorney Romualdo called me on a Tuesday morning. "Mr. Leland, can you come to my office?" His voice was somber. "Today?" "Yes, today." I told Sheila I had errands to run. She barely looked up from her phone. I took a taxi to Romualdo's office. He was waiting, an envelope on his desk between us. "Sit down," he said gently. I sat. He slid the envelope across the desk. "I'm sorry to tell you this," he said, "but the property was sold 3 years ago to a resort development company out of Manila." My ears started ringing. "What?" "The current owner, the one your partner claimed to be buying from, he doesn't exist. The documents you were shown, they're forgeries. Very good ones, but forgeries." He pulled out more papers. "The construction company on those contracts also doesn't exist. The business registration number is fake, but the invoices, the blueprints, all fabricated." He paused. "Mr. Leland, I also pulled bank records. With the account information you provided, I was able to trace where the money went." He showed me. Sheila had transferred the money out within 3 days of each deposit I made. Most of it went to an account under a different name, Jomar Cruz, Manila. "Who is that?" I asked, my voice strange and distant. "I don't know," Romualdo said quietly. "But Mr. Leland, I need you to understand something. You're not the first person to come to this office with a story like yours. This happens more than you think. I'm sorry." I sat there. The room felt like it was tilting. "How much did I lose?" I asked. He looked at the papers. "By my count, $433,000. 450, I said. I gave her another 17 for her brother. Romualdo shook his head. "I'm sorry, sir. Is there anything else I can do?" I stood up. My legs were shaking. "No, thank you." I don't remember the taxi ride back. I walked into the apartment and Sheila wasn't there. I called her, straight to voicemail. I texted her, "Where are you?" No response. I waited. Hour after hour, I sat on that couch and waited. She didn't come home that night. The next morning, I checked the bedroom. Her closet was empty. Her makeup, her shoes, her clothes, all of it gone. In the bathroom, her toothbrush was gone, like she'd never existed. On the kitchen counter, there was a note. Simple white paper, her handwriting. "I'm sorry, Leland. I never meant to hurt you, but I had no choice. Please don't look for me." I read it 3 times. Then I tore it into pieces. I threw the pieces in the trash. I sat on the floor, my back against the kitchen cabinets, and I cried. I cried for Margaret. I cried for the man I used to be. I cried for every dollar I'd worked 30 years to save. But mostly, I cried because some part of me still loved her. Even knowing what she was, what she'd done, some pathetic part of me still loved her. And that was the worst part of all. I'm back in New Hampshire now. Gary picked me up from Manchester Airport. He saw me coming through arrivals and just opened his arms. I walked into them and broke down right there in the terminal. He didn't say "I told you so." He didn't say anything. He just held me up while I fell apart. I sold my house. Had to. I'm in a small apartment now in Concord. 1 bedroom, thin walls, neighbors who play music too loud. I have $30,000 left in my account. That's it. 30 years of work. $450,000. Gone. I tried to report it to the authorities in the Philippines. They took my statement, nodded sympathetically, told me they'd investigate. I never heard back. I tried to find Sheila online. Her Facebook is gone. Her Instagram is gone. It's like she never existed. Maybe she didn't. Maybe I invented her, some desperate fantasy I needed to believe in. I see a therapist now. Her name is Dr. Patricia. She's kind but direct. "What did you learn from this?" she asked me in our 3rd session. "That loneliness makes you stupid," I said. "That when you want something badly enough, you'll ignore every red flag in front of you. What else? That love isn't real if it's only coming from one person." I thought about that for a long time. I regret how it ended. I regret not listening to Gary. I regret being so desperate to matter that I ignored the truth. But I don't regret believing in something, in someone. Even if it was a lie, at least I felt alive for a while. At least I tried. She wrote something in her notebook. That's progress, Leland. I still think about her sometimes. Late at night when I can't sleep, I wonder if any of it was real. The morning walks, the laughter, the way she looked at me in that cafe in Mactan when she said I was different. I want to believe some of it was real, just a little, just enough to mean I wasn't completely blind. But I know better. I know I was a mark, a lonely old widower with money and no one to spend it on. I was convenient, that's all. I wonder about Jomar sometimes, who he is, if he's the real boyfriend, if they're spending my money right now, laughing about the stupid American who believed every word. I hope they are. In a strange way, I hope someone got happiness out of my stupidity. Gary comes by twice a week. We watch baseball. We don't talk about the Philippines unless I bring it up, which is less and less these days. Last week he brought pizza and beer, and we sat on my little balcony watching the sun set over Concord. "You doing okay?" he asked. "Yeah," I said. "I think so." "You think you'll ever go back? To dating? I mean?" I shook my head. "No, I don't think so. I don't trust myself anymore." "That's the thing about trust," he said. "You have to give it to yourself first before you can give it to someone else." I thought about that. "When did you get so wise?" He laughed. "I've always been wise. You just never listened. I'm listening now." "Good," he said. "Better late than never. I'm 62 years old. I'm broke. I'm alone. I live in a small apartment and I work part-time at a hardware store because $30,000 doesn't last forever. My kids call more now. They heard what happened, I think from Gary, and they've been checking in. We're rebuilding something. Slowly. It's not much, but it's real. I don't hate Sheila. I wish I could. Hate would be easier than this empty ache I carry around. But I can't hate her. She was surviving the only way she knew how. In a country where teachers make nothing and tourists have everything, I was an opportunity. I just wish she'd given me the chance to help her honestly. I would have, if she'd just told me the truth. But maybe that's the point. Maybe the truth would have meant less money. Maybe honesty doesn't pay as well as lies. I learned something about myself through all this. I learned that I was so terrified of being alone that I'd pay any price to feel connected to someone. $450,000. That was the price of not being lonely for 6 months. Was it worth it? I don't know. Some days I think yes. Most days I think no. But I'm different now, awake in a way I wasn't before. I see clearly now what I was too desperate to see then. That you can't buy love. You can't buy belonging. You can only buy the illusion of it, and illusions always disappear in the morning light. Sometimes I dream about that cafe in Mactan, Sheila across from me, laughing in the sunlight. In the dream, I stand up and walk away. I thank her for the coffee and I walk away, back to my hotel, back to my flight, back to my empty house in New Hampshire. In the dream, I keep my money and my dignity and my self-respect, but I also keep my loneliness. And when I wake up, I don't know which version of me had it worse, the one who walked away with nothing lost, or the one who stayed and lost everything. Maybe that's the real lesson. There's no right answer, just choices and consequences in the long, slow work of learning to live with both. I'm doing that work now, learning to live with who I was and who I am, learning to forgive myself for being human, for wanting, for believing, for hoping against hope that I could matter to someone again. I mattered to Margaret for 40 years. She knew me, really knew me, my flaws, my fears, my quiet goodness, and she loved me anyway. That was real. Sheila never knew me at all. She knew my bank account. She knew my loneliness. She knew exactly which buttons to push to make me feel like I mattered, but she never knew me. And I'm starting to think that's okay, because at least now I know the difference. At least now I know what real looks like. And maybe that's worth $450,000. Maybe that's worth everything I lost. To finally understand what I had with Margaret. To finally see clearly the difference between being loved and being used. I'm broke. I'm alone. But I'm awake now. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough.